Tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Robin Longhurst and I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic here at the University of Waikato. It's my pleasure to be introducing Martin Lodge's public lecture tonight as part of his promotion to Professor in the School of Arts. Firstly, I want to begin by saying a special thanks to all of you for coming out this evening and supporting Martin in what is an extraordinarily difficult time. The emotions we have following the horrific events on Friday are still so raw, and many of us are still processing feelings of hurt, pain, and anger. Right now, it seems impossible to go about normal life when it is anything but. It speaks volumes about the audience we have here tonight and the strength we have in coming together as a university community in hard times and supporting one another. It's been incredibly touching to see in recent days the outpouring of love and support from our students and staff, for those affected and for Christchurch. There have been some events on campus to allow us to pay our respects and grieve, and there are more opportunities to do so, with a vigil to be held here tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m. outside the Student Centre, and you are all very welcome to join us for that. As I said earlier, tonight is about celebrating Martin's achievements. Before he takes us into a wonderful world of music, I have some details to share with you about his career. He has received commissions from major performance ensembles in New Zealand, including the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, the Auckland Philharmonic, the Ogan Trio, and the New Zealand Chamber Soloists, as well as from leading performers in other parts of the world, such as William Dowdell in Ireland, Timothy Dayton in the USA, and Wolfgang Emanuel Schmidt in Germany. After completing university studies in music and English literature, Professor Lodge spent 13 years as a freelance composer and musician, working mainly out of Wellington. In 1995, he was appointed to the staff of the Conservatorium of Music at the University of Waikato. In 1990 and 1991, he held the Mozart Fellowship at the University of Otago, New Zealand's longest established composer residency position. In 1993, he was the composer in residence with the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra, for whom he wrote Symphony No. 1, Flowers of the Sea. Martin has been a member of the International Advisory Board of the British Review of New Zealand Studies and served on the International Advisory Board of CNZS Bulletin of New Zealand Studies, and on the editorial board of Massey University Music Editions. He's currently a member of the editorial board for Promethean's University Editions Music Schools. In 2013, he won a Power Homestead Artist in Residence Award. Martin has made an active contribution to music at the university, becoming Chair of Music from July 1999 to June 2002, and again from January 2012 to December 2014. Currently, he is Director of Composition Studies. His principal teaching areas are composition and studies in New Zealand music, and he leads a graduate course in music aesthetics. In 1997, Martin initiated an innovative course on New Zealand music, covering traditional Māori music and popular music, as well as New Zealand composition in the classical Western tradition. He followed up this initiative by planning and leading the introduction of a complete stream of Māori music studies in the Waikato B.Mus degree. He also led the artistic design specifications of this very hall in the University of Waikato Academy of Performing Arts. The hall is now widely regarded as the preeminent venue for chamber music in New Zealand. In 2016, the university received a magnificent 50-piece collection of traditional Māori instruments that Martin commissioned from a team led by the acclaimed carver Brian Flintoff. Horomona Horo, with whom he has also collaborated in creating new works that bring together Western classical and Māori classical instruments into musical form. In April 2017, Martin was both a featured composer and executive producer of a recording of newly commissioned string quartets. The recordings were made by the Polaris Quartet in the group's hometown of Shanghai. So please, join with me in welcoming to the stage Professor Martin Lodge.
Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Pro-Vice-Chancellor, esteemed colleagues, students, wonderful to see especially music students here. Ladies and gentlemen, tēnā koutou katoa. It really is a privilege to be speaking tonight as the first Professor of Music at the University of Waikato. I see the position to be not just an individual post, but as a role that represents the whole academic body of music staff and students. And it's heartening that the university is showing its support in this way for the creative and performing arts as an important part of the university's subject offerings. Now, just a bit of housekeeping. You're welcome to take photos during the evening if you wish, without flash, please. But also be aware that the whole event is being streamed live to the internet and will be available as a video that you can view and download from the university website in the days ahead. Well, in keeping with tradition, I need to begin by acknowledging those who've gone before, those professional ancestors upon whose work music staff continue to build today. We especially remember the founding staff member of music, Diane Wells, and it's wonderful that Sonia Wells is here with us tonight. Others who contributed significantly to the growth of music include Margaret Crawshaw, who established piano studies, Mona Ross, our first vocal teacher, and her successor, David Griffiths, and in the academic field, Christopher Hainsworth, William Darth, and Ian Morley. I would also like to thank you, our many supporters, and the benefactors whose financial contributions have given music such a boost over the decades. We're particularly grateful to the Laura Howell Trust, whose input enabled the teaching of performance to begin in the first place some 30 years ago, and that trust still gives annually to support performance teaching. Also, very generous figures such as Emeritus Professor Ian Graham and Aggie Leigh-Hargrave, and more recently the late Richard May. Well, as you can see, the piano is out, the piano stands are up. There will indeed be a performance to round off my talk, so I'm going to make my talk a little shorter than usual to leave time for the music. As a composer and a teacher, as well as a writer and commentator on music, I get to look at music from a number of different angles, ranging from the creative, the reflective, the receptive, the pedagogical, and the critical. And in recent years, it's become increasingly clear to me that just as the world is changing at a tremendous rate, especially through the burgeoning of technology and the ubiquity of the internet, so the nature of music is changing too, or at least the way we need to think about it is changing. Focus on this issue has been sharpened greatly by the dramatic effects of the internet on music. Not only is music now most commonly disseminated via the internet, and thus, as we say in the trade, electronically mediated, but the economic model of the internet and the way people have come to accept it is overwhelmingly powerful. Essentially, people like us, users of the internet, trade their shopping, their professional connections, their public personas, their personal data, their tastes, in exchange for provision of internet services such as websites, and I guess Facebook is the ultimate case in point of that, but also email, such as Google's Gmail. Services such as these appear to be free, but of course, they're not really. This change in economic model, where in return for services, privacy is bartered instead of money, has not only changed ideas about public versus private life and what constitutes a community or a society, but has also changed the way that music exists. One major change has been the decommodification of music, so that today it's difficult to sell recordings of music and make money purely on the basis of unit sales. In fact, outside a handful of international celebrity figures and supergroups, few composers or performers are able to make significant money from selling recordings anymore. Instead, music has become part of a flux of activity, mediated through electronics and supported to some extent by live shows. And the question of who is doing what in terms of creating, performing, disseminating and listening, and how musical actions and interactions relate to each other has become a really fascinating issue. Thinking about these changes led me back to the writings of composer, musicologist and educator Christopher Small. Originally from Palmerston North, he's a classic case of a prophet without honour in his own land, but respected greatly overseas. After leaving New Zealand as a young man, Small was based most of his life in London, but spent the last 20 or so years of his life in Spain. Small wrote a series of books that have proved hugely influential, despite being controversial, even radical, in the way that in them he proposed re-evaluating the function and place of music in society. His last and most important book was Musicologist, which, if you can see it, has a revealing subtitle, The Meanings of Performing and Listening. In Musicologist, Small noted that there are three questions that seem to keep recurring about music throughout the ages. Firstly, what is this thing called music that's prevalent in every society and in which humans continue to invest huge amounts of time, attention, emotional commitment, creativity, and money? And number two, of course, that favourite old chestnut, what is the meaning of music? And thirdly, what is the function of music for the human species? Chris Small posited that there can never be convincing answers to any of these questions because the questions themselves are wrong. There is, he wrote, no such thing as music. Music is not a thing at all, but an activity, something that people do. I felt strongly affirmed when I read those words a few years ago. They confirmed an idea that I'd slowly been groping my way towards, which was that we often try to think about music in ways that are really not very helpful. Well, as can happen with these sorts of evolving ideas, once the first step of illumination has been made, it's then easier to see other connections. One such connection turned up in what at first seemed an unlikely quarter, namely the computer analysis of big data in popular music that's disseminated on the internet. The American electronics researcher and engineer Joy Johnson has a very interesting video clip on YouTube explaining why the self-titled Audio Common Group that spun out of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology is so interested in using computers to apply data analysis and feedback to the reception of recorded music. Borrowing a term from live drama, Audio Common aims, quote, to remove the fourth wall that seems to have come to exist between performers and listeners in recorded music. Here's the opening minute or so of her talk. If I can get it to play.
So a lot of you are probably wondering, why did I join a music technology startup after doing all that work to get a PhD? A big part of that is an exciting transition I'm going to talk about today, which, as he mentioned, is a transition to interactive music consumption and data. So when we used to listen to music, it was hard, right? We had to break out clunky, heavy equipment. We had to, use some unconventional accessories. I don't know how many people remember the pencil and the cassette tape trick. When we wanted to hear the next song, some people had to flip over a record, get the needle in just the right point in the groove. We had to push buttons, we had to turn knobs, and when we wanted to learn more, we even had to dig through liner notes and that tiny, tiny writing in those album booklets, if anybody remembers that. So at the time, a lot of this bothered us, and as engineers, and scientists, and even musicians, we set out to fix this. And we did. We made things lighter, more data-rich, faster, easy, and in some cases, free. So how could things get any better? Well, at some point in this frenzy to create a more frictionless music experience, we lost something. We built a wall between our music creators and our music consumers, between the artists and the fans. We took music listeners from a place of activity to passivity.
You'll notice there that Johnson focuses on recorded music. That's because she's coming at the issue from an engineering point of view. Well, traditionally, over the past 100 years or so, recorded music has arrived on vinyl, tape, CD, or now the internet, completely finished by a music producer, so the listener cannot interact with it very much. When playing back recorded music, we can control volume and maybe left-right speaker balance, but not much else. Overall, very limited interaction is possible, and the performers who made the recording are certainly not aware of any choices that individual listeners are making when using the recording. Now, in the recording process, particularly of studio-based popular music, the component parts of a recording are called stems. A stem might be something like the drum track, or the lead guitar, or the vocalist, and so on. Combining stems is called mixing. And today it's possible to offer music as a package of stems, which can be heard either pre-mixed by the producer or available to be mixed according to the listener's own preference. Here's a snippet from the same video showing very briefly how this technology can work in practice. In this case, the demonstration shows how a listener using a smartphone can choose to listen not just to a selected piece of music, in this case it's a rock song, but more than that, the listener can choose to listen to any single part or combination of parts of the song. In other words, to his or her own mixing of the stems.
Since the advent of recorded music, music has always been ingested the same way. You stand in front of some speaker system and you listen. And not much innovation has come in that respect. The market has told us that this experience is stale. People want more. This is a very flat experience with music, with all the innovation around us in software, hardware, and data. And even with all the leaps and bounds being done, we found by a new derivation called what we call completion rate, that 50% of users or music consumers skip a song within 30 seconds, meaning that they're almost as likely to skip a song as they are to even listen to it. So we know that we still have this flat music problem. So what are we going to do to fix it? We believe that the answer is interactive music experiences with multi-track stems.
As you can see, this is a very different way of receiving recorded music. The listener has a much more active role in the musical equation, but the really interesting part is what comes next. Once a listener's preferred personal mix of the stems has been decided, it can be saved on that smartphone, and that version can be emailed to the record company or artist, where a computer analyzes all the thousands of different mixes sent in by fans, and from them creates a new super mix for optimum popularity. Now this is popular music in a highly interactive way, or maybe it's democracy and populism gone mad. It could be exciting, or it could be a recipe for blanding down every piece of music and its performance to the lowest common denominator, depending on your point of view. The traditional golden triangle of musical activity is create, perform, listen. The composer, the performer, the audience. But as we saw in that video clip, computer technology now is allowing increased interactivity in music between performer and listener. In that example, the listener can take on part of the producer's role, but there's no reason why even greater choice shouldn't be offered, so that the listener might also take on part of the composer's role. So I think we need to turn the triangle of relationships into a rectangle. If you think about it, we've had basic possibilities for electronic mediation when listening to recordings for quite a long time. For example, we can choose to listen to the movements of a Beethoven symphony in a different order to what the composer prescribed. It's as easy as instructing the CD player or the website to play the movements in the order we want. Now that act alone creates a different set of musical relationships between the large-scale parts of the symphony. So, as listeners, we are beginning to move into the composer's role of determining musical structure. But I've been wondering if the underlying principles here could be applied beyond computer-mediated music to live acoustic music. Is it feasible to rethink the way composer, performer and listener relate to each other and the music being played? Might there be a way to provide a means of mediation that allows more interactivity, perhaps analogous in concept to the role of the computer and internet in recorded music? Well, I think there may be, and the piece you're about to hear tonight was created partly with these ideas in mind. In Ahuna for tongakoro, traditional Maori instruments, and piano trio, which we'll hear played shortly, one of the key compositional ideas I had was to find a way to mediate between the worlds of traditional Maori music and traditional Western classical music. The aim was to allow each partner in the piece to be true to its respective cultural roots, to avoid so-called fusion music. But before getting to that, I think this time to touch very briefly on some technical issues, but not too technical. In the day-to-day activity of music at present, I see four elements as being important, and increasingly they're concurrent and intersecting. We've discussed some of these already, but let's look at notation. The notation system that Western music uses today evolved over several centuries, in fact nearly 1,000 years, in response to the requirement of practical musicians, especially those employed by the Christian Church. Notation began life as a means of strengthening community unity, as it meant that cantors and congregations in different places and over increasingly long time spans could all celebrate their faith using the same music. A community that literally sings from the same hymn book is likely to be a unified community. And then over time in Europe, a musical lingua franca was evolving thanks to notation. Some samples there, one from the 13th century and one from the 18th. The ability to visually represent the musical elements of pitch and time proved to be extraordinarily powerful, and its effects shot well beyond the original straightforward intentions of its early inventors. As the system became more refined and elaborate, those who were creating music for performance, that is, composers, realized that notation could be used to write more intellectually complex music than previously was possible. It could also be used as a virtual laboratory in which experiments were possible on counterpoint, harmony, and structure. It was no longer necessary to work only in real time, as we would say today, but one could arrest time and pause for as long as you like over the construction of a chord, say, or the architectural shape of a piece of music. And it turned out eventually that musical notation was, in a sense, the functional predecessor of computer programming, which in essence specifies events in relation to time and in relation to other events. Well, philosophical discussion about the real nature and the function of music notation continues to abound, complicated, of course, by the invention of audio recording in the late 19th century. Recording has not made notation redundant, as some predicted it might, but instead, recording has developed notation systems of its own, particularly since the advent of digital processors. Here's a shot from the computer screen of a composer working on a film score. The word logic refers to the software being used, not to the process. Composition, editing and mixing of recordings is now routinely done using a combination of the oral, that is listening, and the visual, which is looking at waveforms and tracks on a computer screen like that one. So in a sense, we've actually moved back close to the original use of notation, in which visual representations were generated to aid our ears and memories. So let's put the old and the new together. And you can see increasingly they look alike. Use of digital editing programs also has meant the recording producer has now become part of the performance process. And as we saw in that video clip, today listeners can also take on the role of producers and control not only mixing, but potentially also change elements of the composition itself. The whole musical equation is becoming much more of a flux of activity and less a collection of things. Here's a slightly tangential example of what I mean. This is a photo taken inside one of the Wynyard silos on the Auckland waterfront in 2016, showing one of the 4 interactive installations I created with a small group of musicians and technicians. These installations were devised at the invitation of the Bioengineering Institute at the University of Auckland to contribute interactive music installations as part of its public demonstration of new medical technology. In these music installations, newly invented medical sensors could be worn by members of the public. This allowed aspects of their physiology, in this case it was breathing because the station refers to the function of the lungs, to interact directly with the music and the video on the screens. Turning back now to music notation, one especially thorny issue about it is the role notation has when it's been used to transcribe live, folk or improvised music. In other words, to render out of time music which was completely transitory in its tradition and original execution. As a composer, in recent years I've had to grapple with this question and decide how to create music scores for pieces that involve both Western instruments and traditional Maori instruments. Not only does each group of instruments have its own completely different cultural traditions about how and when to use every instrument and a long history of performance techniques, but the issue of notation itself is challenging. Western notation, as mentioned earlier, began as a tool for maintaining religious hymns, then began to be applied to non-vocal music as well. As notation became more and more used by instrumentalists, and thus less and less attached to words, the issues of specifying things like pitch, rhythm, phrasing, dynamics, tempo, and so on all became more urgent and challenging. Notation evolved to meet those challenges, as they were issued by Western instruments, which themselves were undergoing constant evolutionary development. By the 18th century, both instruments and notation techniques were highly developed and largely symbiotic. Things like scales, tuning systems, and rhythmic figures determined how notation was refined. But a different kind of music, such as traditional Maori music, had played no part in the evolution of the Western notation system. And thus there is a gulf separating what the tonga pōro, the traditional Maori instruments, do and how they are played on the one hand, with the traditions and characteristics of Western notation on the other. One of the issues about this divide that I, amongst a number of other musicians, have had to come up with practical solutions for is how to create scores for both Western instruments and Maori instruments when they're being played in the same composition. Of course, each composer finds his or her own answer to this question. For my part, I prefer not to compromise the Maori instruments by writing for them using the Western stave with specified notes, C, D, F sharp and so on, as one does for Western instruments, because notions such as scales and exactly determinate pitch and rhythmic elements generally are not part of the traditional cultural lexicon of Tonga. To my mind, it's better to allow each tradition to be true to its roots and to try and find a creative space or meeting point where musical interaction can take place. In practice, this has meant entrusting the performers of Tonga Kōrero with considerable freedom to create their parts in the moment. They're not really improvising freely, but more it's in the nature of composing and performing on the fly, borne aloft by a deep knowledge of the instruments, their cultural history, and deciding in the moment how those considerations should best find musical expression within the context of a particular work and a particular performance. As you can see in this page from Ahuna, that element of interactivity is facilitated by the non-prescriptive notation given for the Tonga Kōrero. I'll try and use the laser pointer here. Here's the violin part, the cello part, the piano part, and the Tonga Kōrero part is just a single line. And when it enters, you probably can't read that, that's too small. It tells the name of the instrument, the effect that is required, when to enter, but after that it's a wiggly line. In other words, it's up to the performer to create the music based on their knowledge of the instruments and the piece. Here, the score has taken on the role of a mediating element. In this respect, I suggest it could be considered analogous to the digital technology Joy Johnson was demonstrating in that video clip. So the score can be the mediating element in our four-part circle of interaction in music. The hope is that this freer kind of scoring will also create a platform of mediation in which all of us as listeners can choose how we think the two worlds of music are interacting in this moment of time, in this performance. We currently live in what has been called a post-genre age, a time in which arguments about what classical music is, what popular music is, what jazz may or may not be, what electronic music is, are almost impossible to resolve by consensus. Most people today are exposed to and interact with a wide range of musical styles, approaches, and cultures. The key is to remain open-minded and to be active, to interact. Douglas Lilburn, who was one of my teachers and was regarded as the pater familias of New Zealand composers, wrote that the core of art is community. And he reiterated W.B. Yeats's observation that the journey towards a universal human statement begins with discovering the truth of one's own village. I'd like to think that in just a very small way, Ahuna may contribute to that journey. That ends my talk. It's now my pleasure to invite onto the stage the performers for Ahuna Horomonohoro, Celia Griffiths, James Tennant, and Catherine Austin. The title seems particularly appropriate in light of what the country is going through at the moment. By serendipity, it means join together and face forward in one direction.
invited us to think about music and its meaning to us individually and also within a culture and society. He also asked us to consider how the development of different technologies have led to the ways in which the production of music is mediated. He has shown us how the origins of the different forms of notation for Western classical music tradition and for traditional Maori music have provided challenges for him and for performers. At this point, I would like to acknowledge and thank the performers for meeting this challenge. Horomona, Celia, Catherine and James. It was a wonderful rendition of Professor Lodge's composition and very fitting for the times we are in at present. Not all of you will know that another composition by Professor Lodge is the music that is played at the commencement of some of the graduation ceremonies. The full title of the graduation music is Processional Fanfare for the University of Waikato. It was written in 2014 and originally scored for 5 brass instruments, but has been arranged for various other instruments since. We think it was first heard in public when a recording of the brass version was played at the graduation ceremony at the Marae here at the university in 2014. Since then it has been heard at a number of university graduation ceremonies, most recently at the 2018 Claudeland ceremonies. It is becoming a tradition which I hope continues long into the future for our graduation ceremonies, and we have Martin to thank for this. This now brings the formal part of the evening to a conclusion. I would like to thank you all for attending and invite you to join Professor Lodge in the Opus Bar, which is now open for refreshments. I'm sure if you have any questions, he will be very willing to answer them there. Finally, before we move out of the concert chamber, I invite you to join me in thanking Professor Lodge once again for his illuminating and thought-provoking address.
Yeah.